everybody. Welcome to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we talk about all things strange and spooky. And this week, we're going to lean a little bit into the strange, not so spooky, but more into the strange. Before I get into that, I just want to give a huge shout out to all of our fans, just anybody who's been following us along since the beginning, or if you've jumped in along the way. I'm getting a lot more comments on the YouTube videos, a lot more emails sent to me. So that's awesome. I love hearing from you guys. I love hearing your stories, even if you don't want to come on the air. I love the comments that you guys are leaving on our episodes and just having that dialogue with you guys, the back and forth and joking around and talking about things that we believe in. So if you've been here a while, thank you for sticking with us. And if you're new to the show, we hope you'll stick around and give us a like, give us a subscribe. If you're listening on a podcast platform, please give us a rating. We would appreciate that. It really helps the show. Give us whatever you think we deserve. You know, it doesn't have to be the 5 stars, but 5 stars would be appreciated. So if you guys like it, we appreciate it, but I appreciate you guys. So thanks for listening week in and week out. This has been a tough year for me in many ways, and it's not letting up really right now. So, but I'm trudging forward, just trying to keep the show going, keep everything going here. So enough of that. Let's get into some strange stuff. So this week, I was talking to the lovely Rebecca last night, and you guys listened to this on Tuesday, so a lot of this has already happened. But we are planning to go to the Renaissance Fair this weekend. So by the time you're listening to this, we've already gone. But we're going to the Renaissance Fair, and I was talking to her about another podcast episode, and she was like, why don't you do something on strange, mythical creatures? Because, you know, you think Renaissance Fair, you think unicorns and dragons and things like that, fairies. So we got to talking about that, and there is a section of cryptozoology. I'm wearing my International Cryptozoology Museum t-shirt today, as you can see. But there's a section of cryptozoology that is more rooted in folklore and mythology and some just outright hoaxes. So I thought I'd talk about a few of those today because these are things that a lot of people don't necessarily think of when they think of cryptozoology or folklore. Everybody knows leprechauns and fairies as far as folklore, and as far as cryptids, everybody knows Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster, but there's some more eccentric ones out there, some rarer, lesser known cryptids and mythical creatures. So I thought I would just highlight a few of my favorites today, and not going to get to all of them. I'm just going to do a quick overview here. This is just like a primer on some mythical creatures that I like, and some of them are proven hoaxes and just creative taxidermy. Others are kind of in that realm of nobody has ever stepped forward to claim that they are hoaxes, that they are responsible for these hoaxes, but they kind of make you wonder because they don't necessarily fit into the natural world as we know it. And before we go forward, I just want to showcase these 2 books. When I was growing up, these were pretty big for me, and I will leave links down below. But the first one is the Encyclopedia of Monsters by Daniel Cohen. I read and reread and read this book again as a kid, and this is the paperback copy. When I was a kid, I used to take out the hardcover one from the library, and I'd read it over and over again. It had a lot of these cryptids in there. And another book I really love, and I did a review on this on the blog. I will link to that in the description below as well if you want to hear about that. But this is North American Monsters, the Field Guide to North American Monsters by W. Hayden Blackman. And this showcases all sorts of North American cryptids. It's done very sort of tongue-in-cheek, so don't read this and get offended if you're a real Bigfoot believer and you read this and it's kind of done a little tongue-in-cheek. It's very informative, but it's done with a healthy dose of humor, which I appreciate as someone who does everything with a little dose of humor. So I will link to those 2 books below. And of course, anything by Lauren Coleman, the awesome Lauren Coleman, who's just done so many books on cryptids in America and elsewhere. So you can't go wrong with a Lauren Coleman book. So any Lauren Coleman book, pick it up if you're interested in cryptids and any of these, you know, cryptids from folklore or legend and mythology. So let's get into some of them. And the first one I'm going to hit, you guys have probably heard of. So, okay. So the first one is called the Jackalope. And I'm just going to read from Wikipedia here. Again, the books do a better job of describing these creatures, but I figured I'd start with the jackalope. I figure everybody has either heard of the jackalope or has seen the jackalope. I mean, it's been used in commercials, I think, for like Lunchables and things like that. But I'll read a little bit of it here from Wikipedia. The jackalope is a mythical animal of North American folklore, described as a jackrabbit with antelope horns. The word jackalope is a portmanteau of jackrabbit and antelope, so jackalope. Many jackalope taxidermy mounts, including the original, are made with deer antlers because hair, you need smaller deer antlers, not antelope. In the 1930s, Douglas Herrick and his brother, hunters with taxidermy skills, popularized the American jackalope by grafting deer antlers onto a jackrabbit carcass and selling the combination to a local hotel in Douglas, Wyoming. Thereafter, they made and sold many similar jackalopes to a retail outlet in South Dakota, and another taxidermist continues to manufacture the horned rabbits in the 21st century. Stuffed and mounted, jackalopes are found in many bars and other places in the United States. Stores catering to tourists sell jackalope postcards and other paraphernalia, and commercial entities in America and elsewhere have used the word jackalope or a jackalope logo as part of their marketing strategies. The jackalope has appeared in published stories, poems, television shows, video games, and a low-budget mockumentary film, which I've never seen. I have to check that out. The Wyoming legislature has considered bills to make the jackalope the state's official mythological creature, which I didn't know states had official mythological creatures. Very cool, though. The underlying legend of the jackalope, upon which the Wyoming taxidermists were building, may be related to similar stories in other cultures and other historical times. Researchers suggest that at least some of the tales of horned hares were inspired by sightings of rabbits infected with the, and forgive me, I'm going to mispronounce this, Shopi papillomavirus. It causes horn and antler-like tumors to grow in various places on a rabbit's head and body. Folklorists see the jackalope as one of a group of tall tail animals known as fearsome critters, common to North American culture since the turn of the 20th century. These fabulous beasts appear in tall tales featuring hodags, which I'm going to get to, giant snakes, fur-bearing trout, which I decided not to talk about in this episode, and many others. Some such stories lend themselves to comic hoaxing by entrepreneurs who seek attention for their personal or their region's fortune. So this clearly is a fake. This is not a real animal. But there is a little bit of a basis in reality here, which I thought was interesting, that some of these rabbits with this disease would have these growths. And yeah, if you saw a rabbit with even very small antlers, it's going to freak you out a little bit and just be a little bit weird to see. I'm not going to read this whole article. This article goes into a lot of detail about the jackalope, different variants, the tall tails. Again, a lot of this stuff came from the Old West, but these were mainly used just to fool people and to be funny. So this one is clearly a hoax, perhaps based on a real condition that some rabbits fall victim to. But I'm just going to show a picture of the jackalope here. So here it is, just looks like a rabbit with deer antlers. So, but again, I figure most people know of the jackalope, but wanted to feature this one because it is one of the most popular of the mythical creatures that are out there. And I don't know if we'll see one at the Renaissance Fair, but there's your jackalope. So I'm going to move on to the next one. So the next mythical creature I want to talk about, and this is one of my favorites, and this I read about initially in the Encyclopedia of Monsters, which I just showed you guys a little while ago, and it's called a Jenny Haniver. And I'm going to just blow up this picture here so you guys can take a look at it. It's this creepy, it almost looks like a reptile or a fish. It's got an evil looking face. I mean, if this thing came running at you or, chasing you off the beach, you'd be flipping out. But there's a rational explanation for this one. And I'm going to read this. A Jenny Haniver is the carcass of a ray or a skate that has been modified by hand, then dried, resulting in a mummified specimen intended to resemble a fanciful fictional creature, such as a demon or dragon. This practice dates back to the 16th century, when these specimens were often sold as curiosities to sailors and collectors. So here we have something that is a regularly found creature, a ray, like a manta ray or a skate. And you've seen these at aquariums. Sometimes you can put your hand in and touch them. I mean, the smaller versions. But if you flip them up and look at their stomachs, you'll see, what looks like a face. It's not a face, but it looks like a face. It's not their eyes, but it's like their nostrils and their mouth. But the way it looks, it's almost like a face. And that's kind of what you're seeing in this picture here. You're seeing the nostrils here, and then the actual mouth, the actual eyes are on the top of a ray, but they dry it out, they cut it up, they cut the fins to make it look like wings and a weird head and a tail and legs, and it just ends up looking like this horrific creature. But I remember reading about these as a kid and just thinking, like, these old sailors are coming across these things and possibly believing they exist. I mean, they thought mermaids existed and things like that. And Rebecca and I do this game sometimes where we do H words. It's like hello, and then we do hola, and then we do hamburger. And I did Haniver one time, Jenny Haniver, and she didn't know what the hell I was talking about, because most people don't usually. But that's my knowledge. So I'll go into a little bit more of this. This is a much shorter entry than the jackalope. So as far as the name, one suggestion for the origin of the term was the French phrase, and again, I'm going to mispronounce this, Jeune d'Anvers, youth of Antwerp. British sailors cockneyed, hello, this description into the personal name Jenny Haniver. Jenny Haniver. So the history, Jenny Hanivers have been created to look like various mythical creatures, including devils, angels, and dragons. Some writers have suggested the sea monk may have been a Jenny Haniver. The earliest known picture of Jenny Haniver appeared in Conrad Gesner's Historia Animalium, Volume 4, in 1558. Wow. Gesner warned that these were merely disfigured rays and should not be believed to be miniature dragons or monsters, which was a popular misconception at the time. Again, back then, they were thinking sea monsters and mermaids, and there was just a lot of mystery about the oceans and the sea. The most common misconception was that Jenny Hanivers were basilisks. As basilisks, were creatures that killed with merely a glance, no one could claim to know what one looked like. For this reason, it was easy to pass off Jenny Hanivers as these creatures, which were still widely feared in the 16th century. In Veracruz, Jenny Hanivers are considered to have magical powers and employed by, again, I'm going to mispronounce this, curanderos for their rituals. This tradition is similar to one in Japan, where fake taxidermy ningyo, similar to Fiji mermaids, were produced and kept in temples. And again, you can look into Fiji mermaids. They're very similar to this, but again, I'm trying to keep this episode kind of as a primer here. And again, if you guys like this episode, I can go into more of these other mythical creatures or creative taxidermy, rogue taxidermy, I think they call it. So that's the Jenny Haniver. And again, I'll show you just pictures. I mean, look at this. I mean, it almost looks like a slee stack from Land of the Lost with the big black eyes here and the mouth. And, if you saw this thing and didn't know it was a ray, especially, 400 years ago, 500 years ago, this looks horrifying. And someone says, hey, I captured this off the coast of so-and-so, and here you go. It looks horrifying. It looks like a dragon or a demon or just something that got hauled up from the deepest, darkest depths of the ocean, and not something you'd want to run into. So very cool. I love Jenny Hanivers, and I went to school with a Jenny Haniver. No, I didn't. Just bad joke. Sorry. So there's your Jenny Hanivers. So I mentioned the Hodag earlier, and here we are. We're at the Hodag. And this one, let me just pull up this picture real quick. I'll see if I can get a better one, possibly, because I can't really zoom into this one too well. But there it is. It's this old black and white photo. And the Hodag, let me just read about the Hodag for you. In American folklore, the Hodag is a fearsome critter resembling a large bull-horned carnivore with a row of thick curved spines down its back. The Hodag was said to be born from the ashes of cremated oxen, as the incarnation of the accumulation of abuse the animals had suffered at the hands of their masters. The history of the Hodag is strongly tied to Rhinelander, Wisconsin, where it was claimed to have been discovered. The Hodag is figured prominently in Paul Bunyan stories, early Paul Bunyan stories. So the origins, in 1893, newspapers reported the discovery of a Hodag in Rhinelander, Wisconsin. The articles claimed the Hodag had the head of a frog, the grinning face of a giant elephant, thick short legs set off by huge claws, the back of a dinosaur, and a long tail with spears at the end. The reports were investigated by well-known Wisconsin land surveyor, timber cruiser, and prankster Eugene Shepard, who rounded up a group of local people to capture the animal. The group reported that they needed to use dynamite to kill the beast. A photograph of the remains of the charred beast was released to the media. It was the fiercest, strangest, most frightening monster ever to set razor-sharp claws on the earth. It became extinct after its main food source, all white bulldogs, became scarce in the area. So right here, you can start seeing that someone's leg is being pulled. And we get to the hoax. Shepard claimed to have captured another hodag in 1896, and this one was captured alive. According to Shepard's reports, he and several bear wrestlers placed chloroform on the end of a long pole, which they worked into the cave of the creature where it was overcome. He displayed this hodag at the first Oneida County Fair. Thousands of people came to see the hodag at the fair or at Shepard's display in a shanty at his house, which I feel like anytime you have a body of something displayed in someone's shanty or their garage and they're charging you a nickel or a quarter, be suspicious. Having connected wires to it, Shepard would occasionally move the creature, which would typically send the already skittish viewers fleeing the display. As newspapers locally, statewide, and then nationally began picking up the story of the apparently remarkable living creature, a small group of scientists from the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., announced they would be traveling to Rhinelander to inspect the apparent discovery. Their mere announcement spelled the end, as Shepard was then forced to admit that the hodag was a hoax. So the legacy of the hodag is that it became the official symbol of Rhinelander, Wisconsin. It is the mascot of Rhinelander High School and lends its name to numerous Rhinelander area businesses and organizations. So here we have another like folklorish. Oh, let me see if this is a better picture. A little bit, but you can see like the big teeth and the horns and the spikes. And I mean, you look at the picture of this thing and it clearly just looks like a dog or some other animal just creatively taxidermied into a hodag. And it's just one of those stories that you read about in all these books, and I've read about it for years, ever since I was a kid, and I don't know why it gets included, but it is folklore, it is mythological. And again, I think it's a cool concept that, you know, America just had this in its sort of infancy in the 1800s, just these weird tall tales and mythological creatures. And again, you have Paul Bunyan and you have, you know, Blue the Ox and Johnny Appleseed and just all this sort of folklore, but cryptids kind of have made their way into the folklore. So I've always thought that was fascinating. So even though we know that these are hoaxes and they're not real, I just think they're kind of cool anyway. And here you have, you know, a hodag in front of a building, in front of the Rhinelander Chamber of Commerce. So we don't have anything cool like this in New York City. So Rhinelander, Wisconsin, everybody, go see the hodag. Very cool. So there you be for the hodag. And we will move on with our mythical creatures. So the Snallygaster is another one of those creatures that I hear about. I read about in books. And again, I don't know if they're in all of these books I just showed you or in the Lauren Coleman books. I've read so many books on cryptids and alleged cryptids and folklore over the years, but I've known about the Snallygaster for years. I don't remember which books it's in exactly. This one, now we're getting less into, you know, further away from the hoaxes, the known hoaxes, more into we don't know territory. So I'll read to you a little bit about the Snallygaster. In American folklore, the Snallygaster is a bird-reptile chimera originating in the superstitions of early German immigrants, later combined with sensationalistic newspaper reports of the monster. Early sightings associate the Snallygaster with Frederick County, Maryland, especially the areas of South Mountain and the Middletown Valley. Later reports would expand on sightings encompassing an area to include Central Maryland and the Washington, D.C. metro area. So, interesting. History. In the 18th century, and I'm not going to read all of this, there's a lot here, but I'll just go into some of the early history. The area of Frederick County, Maryland, was settled by German immigrants beginning in the 1730s. Early accounts describe the community being terrorized by a monster called and again, I'm going to try to pronounce this, Schnellergeist. So Snallygaster, you can kind of see where that comes from. German for quick ghost. So like poltergeist is a noisy ghost, polter meaning noisy and geist meaning ghost. So here's you have Schnellergeist, quick ghost. The earliest incarnations of the creature mixed the half-bird features of a siren with the nightmarish features of demons and ghouls. The Snallygaster was described as half-reptile, half-bird, having a metallic beak lined with razor-sharp teeth, occasionally alongside octopus-like tentacles. The Snallygaster was rumored to swoop silently from the sky to pick up and carry off its victims. The earlier stories claim that this monster sucked the blood of its victims. 7-pointed stars, which reputedly kept the Snallygaster at bay, can still be seen painted on local barns. So, just to stop here, and I'm going to get into a little bit more of this, but right now this is sort of sounding a lot like Thunderbird reports or Jersey Devil reports. So, and you see this a lot in cryptozoology and mythology and folklore. There's a lot of these sort of overlapping features. So it's like, is this the Snallygaster? Is it a Jersey Devil? Is it the Mothman? Because they all kind of have these similar features overlapping. They're not exactly the same, but it does make you wonder if this is like a game of telephone where people are just kind of retelling the story and it changes just enough. So by the time you have Snallygaster and Mothman, they're two very different things. So interesting. In the 19th century, it has been suggested the legend was resurrected to frighten freed enslaved people. In the 20th century, newspaper accounts throughout February, March 1909, which I believe is around the same time there were some Jersey Devil reports, describe encounters between local residents and a beast with enormous wings, a long pointed bill, claws like steel hooks, and an eye at the center of its forehead. It was described as making screeches like a locomotive whistle. So again, a lot of similarities to the Jersey Devil here, just the screeching and the flying and just this kind of almost demonic flying cryptid. So let me go on here. A great deal of publicity surrounded the string of appearances, with the Smithsonian Institution offering a reward for its hide. U.S. President Teddy Roosevelt reportedly considered postponing an African safari to personally hunt the beast. Interesting. It was later revealed that these reports were part of a hoax perpetrated by the Middletown Valley Register, editor George C. Roderick, and reporter Ralph S. Wolfe in an attempt to increase readership. And I've mentioned this before in the past, that the late 1800s, early 1900s, there's a lot of yellow journalism. A lot of these stories you have to take with a grain of salt. A lot of these reporters were trying to sell newspapers, outsell the competition. So you had stories of airships, you had stories of wild men, you had stories of the Jersey Devil, you had stories of the Snallygaster, to try to, it was basically clickbait of, the late 19th and early 20th century. Just please read our newspaper because we have a Snallygaster, we have a Jersey Devil. So you always have to take these things with a grain of salt. I mean, they're interesting from a historical context, but you really have to learn how to sift through what is yellow journalism and what might be an actual sighting. So yeah, and here again, the descriptions, they invented borrowed themes from existing German folklore, including dragon-like creatures who snatched children and livestock, and also appeared to invoke descriptions of the Jersey Devil, which had been spotted mere weeks earlier. So yeah, I was right. This is, a lot of this is taken from Jersey Devil stories, and they were probably just trying to capitalize on that. Not to say that the Jersey Devil sightings were a hoax. I think those probably were as well. But again, game of telephone, Jersey Devil, let's Snallygaster. We're gonna invent that. So I'm actually friends with Sarah Cooper on Instagram. We follow each other. But in 2021, cryptozoologist in Maryland, Sarah Cooper, opened the American Snallygaster Museum in Libertytown, Maryland. So there's actually a museum dedicated to this, and I'll link to her Instagram below so you can follow her and just check out her museum if you're in the Maryland area. And let's move on. Okay, so our next little creature from folklore is called the Squonk. And again, you can see this a lot on Instagram, and it's just a very sort of famous cryptid in those circles. A lot of people will talk about it, and it's supposedly a very ugly creature, a very sad creature. But I will read to you about this, and this one comes from Pennsylvania. So hi, Rebecca, the lovely Rebecca. The Squonk is a mythical creature that is reputed to live in the hemlock forests of northern Pennsylvania in the United States. Johnstown, Pennsylvania celebrates the Squonk at the Squonkapalooza in August. So if you're in PA, try to get there. Origins. The first written accounts of the Squonk from the 1910 book Fearsome Creatures of the Lumberwoods His provenance was attested to in next written iteration in the 1939 book Fearsome Critters. The book suggested that the creature had migrated from deserts to swamps to finally settle in Pennsylvania. As logging camps were continuously moving in the early 20th century, this could explain the purported creature's migration to Pennsylvania. Appearance and behavior. Unlike many mythological creatures, the supposed physical characteristics of the squonk remain unchanged from the original written account, which states, "The squonk is of a very retiring disposition, generally traveling about at twilight and dusk. Because of its misfitting skin, which is covered with warts and moles, it is always unhappy. Hunters who are good at tracking and are able to follow a squonk by its tear-stained trail, for the animal weeps constantly. When cornered, an escape seems impossible, or when surprised and frightened, it may even dissolve itself in tears." Later retellings included the squonks were the slowest on moonlit nights as they try to avoid seeing their ugly appearance in any illuminated bodies of water. In addition to warts and moles, the creatures were given webbed toes on their left feet. The given species taxonomy of the creature, Lacrimacorpus dissolvens, is made up of the Latin tear, body, and dissolve. These refers to its supposed ability to dissolve when captured. So this does not necessarily seem to be a hoax, but it does seem to be just folklore. And I'm going to pull up a picture here of a squonk. And I will put links to all this in here, but you can see it's just this really ugly crying creature that looks very sad. So I don't know where this really comes from. It doesn't say here. Just kind of comes out of nowhere, but it's a very sad, ugly little creature. And there's this whole scientific literature thing here. It's been in popular media. So it's one of those creatures that people hear about. If you're into cryptozoology, you've probably heard about it. But hoax, real animal, misidentified animal, I'm going to go with the last one there. I think it's just a misidentified, or just folklore, just something somebody made up and sung a song about that's been lost to time. And now it's just in the cryptozoological zeitgeist there, and people still talk about it. So, but again, it's one of those ones I read about as a kid, and it just always intrigued me. Again, they mention, the early 1900s. So yellow journalism, just lots of folklore. America kind of coming into its own with its own culture and kind of getting away from the British stuff, 1776, you're getting into the 1800s, and we're just creating our own legends and folklore and mythology. So cool little creature, though very sad. Okay, so the last one I want to talk about today is one that I've mentioned in passing in a few episodes when I'm talking to Scott Perry about Bigfoot, and we've mentioned little people of the woods, the puckwudgie. And this basically comes from Native American folklore, and it's kind of the opposite of Bigfoot, where Bigfoot you have 8, 9, 10-foot tall humanoids. These puckwudgies are more like leprechauns. They're just very small people, little wild men, not big wild men, very short, little wild men of the woods. And they range from being sort of mischievous to just downright evil. So I'll read a little bit from Wikipedia here, and then I have another article pulled up that I'll read from. A puckwudgie is translated by Henry Schoolcraft as little wild man of the woods that vanishes. It is a human-like creature of Wampanoag folklore found in Delaware, Prince Edward Island, and parts of Indiana, sometimes said to be 2 to 3 feet tall. You also hear about the puckwudgie in Massachusetts in the Bridgewater Triangle. And again, Lauren Coleman talks a lot about that. And there are some documentaries out there about the Bridgewater Triangle, and you can hear some creepy stories about puckwudgies. And I'm going to keep reading here, but I'll get to a little bit more of that. So in mythology, according to legend, puckwudgies can appear and disappear at will, shapeshift, of which the most common form is a creature that looks like a porcupine from the back and half troll, half human from the front, and walks upright, lure people to their deaths, use magic, launch poison arrows, and create fire. Native Americans believe that puckwudgies were once friendly to humans, but then turned against them and are best left alone. According to lore, a person who annoyed a puckwudgie would be subject to nasty tricks by it, or subject to being followed by the puckwudgie, who would cause trouble for them. They are known to kidnap people, push them off cliffs, attack their victims with short knives and spears, and to use sand to blind their victims. Puckwudgies, basically, they cause mischief. And just want to read this here. Puckwudgies are magical little people of the forest in Algonquin folklore, similar to European gnomes or fairies. Puckwudgie stories are told throughout the northeastern United States, southeastern Canada, and the Great Lakes region. However, their nature varies in the folklore of different tribes. In the Ojibwe and other Great Lakes tribes, the puckwudgie is considered a mischievous but basically good-natured creature who plays tricks on people but is not dangerous. In the Abenaki and other northeast Algonquin tribes, a puckwudgie can be dangerous, but only to people who treat him with disrespect. In the Wampanoag and other tribes of southern New England, as I mentioned, Massachusetts, puckwudgies are capricious and dangerous creatures who may play harmless tricks or even help a human neighbor, but are just as likely to steal children or commit deadly acts of sabotage. According to some Wampanoag stories, puckwudgies were enemies of the culture hero Moshop and were even responsible for his death. So they're described as being knee-high or even smaller. The name literally means person of the wilderness, and they're usually considered to be spirits of the forest. Sometimes have a weird smell. They have magical power. So these can sound very much like little Bigfoot type people. They have a smell. They're kind of wild men. They use primitive tools, spears or little knives, stone tools, things like that. So who knows? But they're out there, and this is not a taxidermy thing. This goes back to Native American folklore. This predates European settlers in America. So it does make you wonder. And a lot of the stories will say that these creatures are not good for you. Again, mischievous is probably the best case scenario, but I've heard lots of stories where they say that these things will try to lure you into the woods and get you lost and maybe get you killed. They seem, again, a lot of stories I've heard, they seem to have speech, very rudimentary speech, but they can mimic human speech and, come here, and beckon people and like, why? Like these are little tiny creatures. So I can imagine seeing an 8-foot tall, hairy humanoid in the woods would be frightening, but I also think seeing a 2-foot tall, hairy humanoid running through your camp at night would be equally as horrifying and scary and unsettling. So there you have it, a little primer on just some North American mythological creatures. Again, I didn't want to get into dragons or fairies or unicorns. I mean, those are clearly mythological, but you have some of these other ones here that some are clearly hoaxes, some are just passed down from Native American lore. They go back hundreds and hundreds of years. So where did they come from? What were people seeing? Was it a hoax? Were they cryptids? Were they creatures that did exist and are now extinct? But I tried to kind of hit on a little bit of each with this episode, just some known hoaxes and creative taxidermy, some kind of middle of the road things, and then some stuff that just goes back much further than European settlers. So were the Native Americans wrong? What were they seeing in the woods? These little people that they were seeing. We know that there were the Hobbit people found, on the other side of the world, I believe an island off of Africa. I forget, the name's escaping me right now, but there are things in this world that we don't know, or things that used to exist and don't exist anymore. So did those legends get passed down? Clearly the jackalope is fake. The hodag is fake. But you have things like the puckwudgie, you have things like the Snallygaster. What were these things? Some of them were hoax, but just one hoax doesn't mean that every sighting was hoaxed. So love to know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments below. If you want more episodes like this, I'm happy to do them. Like I said, I just wanted to do a quick little primer and just touch on some of my favorites, my personal favorites. Like I said, there's other ones like the fur-bearing trout and all sorts of other weird, either creative taxidermy or just American folklore, totzel worm and fur-bearing trout and all sorts of stuff that we can get into if you guys want to hear more about that. So leave your comments below. Let me know what you think about these cryptids. And if you are a fan here, if you like the video, please give us a subscribe, give us a like, shoot us a comment. I love interacting with you guys. I mean, some of you are just really consistent with commenting, and I love just the interaction, the back and forth. It's good to get feedback, whether it's good or bad. Same if you're listening on a podcast platform. If you're listening to audio only, most of you guys, from the statistics I can see, like the overwhelming majority of you guys are listening on Apple iTunes and Apple Podcasts. So if you guys could leave us a review, I really appreciate that. It really helps the show. You don't have to write anything out. Just give us, click on the amount of stars you think we deserve, and I would appreciate that. And I have t-shirts. If anybody wants a t-shirt, I'm going to have pins soon. So some merchandise. If anybody wants any, shoot me an email. If you have a story, shoot me an email. I'm going to do it over here this time. Jason@oddanduntold.com. You want a t-shirt, you want a pin, you want a sticker. I have stuff, merch to give out if you like. If you have a story, if you want to be on the show, if you just want to send me an email and let me read it on the show, I would appreciate that. I love hearing your stories. Again, Jason@oddanduntold.com. Shoot me an email. I will get back to you. And that'll be it for this week, guys. Going to the Renaissance Fair 3 days ago, when you're hearing this, but pictures may be forthcoming, but maybe not. We'll see, because maybe we're dressing up. So, all right, everybody, until next time, rock and roll.